Hey, everyone, thanks for taking the time out of your no doubt very busy schedule today to spend the time with us on CyberJA as we seek to look into an issue that continues to affect organizations of various types, various industries, and regardless of who you are, or regardless of the nature of your business, then what we're about to talk about is something that affects all of us. And one of the things is that for many persons, then having that preparedness, having the capabilities in place is somewhat of a challenge. You may have maybe a playbook, you may have something on paper, but when the actual event does happen, then it's a different scenario. So, one of the things that we want to look at today is uh, the Ransomware Control Matrix, RCX Readiness. And this is something that I came across on LinkedIn and I found it very interesting. And today we have the author of this great tool, um, Ed Rojas. And that's Ed Rojas. He's the creator of this ransomware control matrix. So, Ed, thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate the the invitation. Thank you so much.
That's great. And for sure, we're looking forward to all that you have in store for us. So, just before we actually get into the details of this application platform that you have actually developed, can you shed some light in terms of who you are as an individual in the industry? I mean, a little bit as to how you reached to where you are before we get into the fun stuff of talking about this ransomware control matrix.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the industry for about 30 years now. Focus has always been on networking. I don't know if you're hearing echo. Okay, it's kind of. Yeah, the focus it's been on data networking, but for the past I would say 15 years, it's been 100% on cybersecurity. And I've worked for major companies previous to. I'm at Tata Consultancy Services right now. I'm a director. Previous to Tata, I was at Deloitte, IBM, HP. I also had my own company, consulting company in Latin America. So I've been doing this for quite a while.
Awesome. Great. So, can you take us along this journey of, I mean, when we think about ransomware, I mean, some of the latest trends or statistics is quite alarming. I mean, for example, one of the latest updates is from Trend Micro that says a study of 145 healthcare organizations found that 57% reported a ransomware attack within the past 3 years. And further statistics says that according to Microsoft, 96.88% of all ransomware infection take under 4 hours to successfully infiltrate their target. And one of the things is that ransomware is one of the main events or challenges that organizations will have to encounter in one form or the other. So, can you talk about? I mean, there are so many tools, resources, security programs that are actually being used, so many frameworks that we have in the systems.
Yeah.
And at times, persons are like confused as to what do we do? I mean, can you provide some insights in terms of what it is that this ransomware control matrix does in terms of helping with the preparation for ransomware?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean the one of the reasons why my colleague Aria Rahimi and I, we focused on this, is because of the report that you just mentioned, right? 57% worldwide is ransomware attack victims. And one of the questions that we had is, with all of the investment, right, the cybersecurity industry, it's a gazillion dollar industry, right? You have companies all over the place that offer everything. And as consumers, organizations, they like to buy. They buy a lot of this uh, all of these solutions, right? Your firewalls, your proxies, everything to do with zero trust. They're loving it. And so the question was always, well, if we're investing so much money, why are there such large numbers of ransomware victims? Ransomware, at the end, it's malware, right? It's and when you do the research on how ransomware it's installed on a user's or the victim's workstation, it's nothing different that a botnet or a Trojan is, right? It you users have to go, they click on a link, they send to a website that's malware, and your Trojan or your malware is uploaded or downloaded to the user's workstation. Um, you may be social engineering through phishing, but there's nothing new, right? So the question is, why is ransomware so visible, so successful? It doesn't make any sense. Are we as an industry doing something wrong that we're all open to ransomware attacks? Or is just that ransomware is the flavor for the next 5 years, right? That's everyone's going to be talking about ransomware, and then when something new comes up, we're going to be talking about something new. I don't know. The What I do know though is that a lot of the services, a lot of companies out there, and the industry as a whole seems to be focusing more on how quickly to recover from a ransomware attack, right? If you look at assessments, ransomware readiness assessments, but many companies, their focus is how quickly can you recover? How is your backup and how's your restore processes, right? And that's already too late. I mean, you already we already received a little notice you've been ransomware, and now, as you said, right, you have a beautiful plan in place. Oh, I know what we're gonna do once we have that notice. But Richard, once you get that notice, you know, all plans go out the window. It doesn't work, and and then it gets worse when you realize, well, I do have a good backup, I do have a good restore, and then you realize that you actually don't have access to that restore. That restore has also been ransomware. So what do you do now? And so our focus for the ransomware control matrix was to see if we can go shift to the left and see how quickly, right? What do we need to have in place as an organization to detect and mitigate ransomware attacks as quickly as possible, right? Again, all of the services that we see right now is how quickly you can recover. And our point of view was, well, don't we have the technology to detect and mitigate as easy as possible, as early as possible? And Richie, you look back and you think, you look at that ransomware control matrix, right? It lists like 82, 84 controls. We all know those controls, right? I mean, this I didn't discover anything new, correct? I mean, we all know web firewall, application web app firewalls. We all know about proxies. We all know about multi-factor authentication. So there's nothing new. What was interesting in the research is that I've never found, when I was in the research to see if anybody, if this list existed, I didn't find it. There's nowhere that shows these are the set of controls that you need to have deployed to build or assess your cybersecurity program to see if you are ready to deal and to detect and mitigate a ransomware attack. If you do the research, right, you're not going to find like the SysTop 20. You're not going to find an OWASP top 10 type of list. And that to me was incredible. I'm like, why hasn't anyone done this before? It's kind of strange, right? And so that's what we decided to do. And at the beginning, what we wanted to do was identify like 20 controls. Why 20? Cybersecurity on its own is extremely complicated, right? I mean, it's just too many moving things, too many moving parts, and to have another framework, it, that wasn't my goal, right? My goal was like, hey, here's a list, top 20 cybersecurity controls you need to have in place. So we did a lot of research, and we looked at a lot of information from CISA.gov, right? Their area about ransomware. They have really good articles there where they talk about every single family, right, of ransomware. And when you start reading through those, it goes in detail into how what the family does, how it's deployed, and then it goes in more detail identifying the techniques and then some recommendations. We did the same thing. We took a look at a lot of those research, like from Trend Micro and Cisco and others, where they talk about ransomware attacks. And we started writing down all the recommendations, right? Because that's what we were interested in. Well, we know how the attack started, right? So now, how do we map those controls, cybersecurity countermeasures to deal with those attacks, right? So when you read CISA.gov and all the other things, they identify techniques. We already spoke about phishing, right? Phishing is the most well-used technique. We have drive-by compromise. We have supply chain compromise, correct? Um, and so forth. And so what we ended up doing is we noticed in all those reports they always refer to the MITRE attack methodology. Oh, this is a MITRE attack technique, so and so. And I was like, well, let's go and review the MITRE attack, see how we can use MITRE attack. And while we were using it, we realized that MITRE attack has a identified a set of stages, right? And what they call the initial access or initial attack phase, if you go there, it identifies 9 well-known techniques. And these are the 9 well-known techniques that every cyber criminal uses to start any type of cyber attack, not just ransomware, any type of cyber attack. And I'm thinking, well, we had this. Why am I the only one looking at this, right? The information is in there. And it's funny because people say to me, how come you came up with this and nobody else did? And I'm like, wow, that's a silly question. Right? It's like it all depends on the situation, it all depends on what we're doing, right? Everyone is doing something different. And so my answer to that question to them was, well, let me ask you this question. When was the wheel invented? Right? Was it invented 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago? It's like, well, about over 5,000 years ago. And we're like, then how come they didn't put wheels on luggage until the 1970s?
That's interesting.
Right? Right? And the answer is because in 1970, travel took off. Travel became available to the masses. And so people like, why are we carrying all this luggage? I remember having to use little trolleys, before, just to lug the luggage, and then wheels came on. Um, anyway, that's the same reason over here. Ransomware is taking off. Why? Because now we have ransomware as a service. Anybody can go ahead and buy, right, a technique. I don't have to be an elite hacker. I can just go on the dark web, purchase this thing, where I use a platform, just like it used to be for DDoS attacks, where you used to get access to a platform and start your attacks. You can do the same thing with ransomware. And that's probably one of the reasons why ransomware has spread, because now we have more people using ransomware attacks because of this ransomware as a service. And so when I started focusing on how I identify those controls, I noticed, right, the MITRE ATT&CK framework initial access phase. And every single report, everyone, you can go ahead and look at all the reports where they tell you what are the stages of the attack and what techniques they use. It will take you back to those 7 well-known techniques, right? And so the next question, Richie, was, well, now I know the techniques. Now I need to know the cybersecurity countermeasures that I need to have to map these techniques. Well, there's MITRE Defend. Now, have you heard of MITRE Defend before, Richie?
Yes, I do.
Good. There's a lot of people that haven't, right? And so to some of them, they're like, oh, where did this come from? And I have a show similar to yours. My focus is for Latin American CISOs, and I've been doing it for 10 years. And Peter, who's the creator or the lead of the MITRE Defend, was on my show a couple of times. So I knew about MITRE Defend about a couple of years ago, and all these things started to click. Right? I'm doing the research MITRE ATT&CK, and I'm like, well, I want to use MITRE Defend because MITRE Defend identifies a set of countermeasures for each of the MITRE techniques. Right? Sorry. So I did that. I started looking at the MITRE Defend, and we started focusing on the well-known techniques and what are the mitigating controls that MITRE Defend identifies. And that's how we started created the ransomware control matrix. And if people haven't seen it, they can go to rcxmatrix.org and they can see what the ransomware control matrix looks like. So it identifies controls and how these controls mitigate each of those 9 attacks, and people are finding it very, very useful.
But not to break you though, the question is, are we to understand that this control matrix
Mhm.
is a pullout from, for example, the MITRE ATT&CK, CIS controls? Is it that they have actually evaluated, look at those common controls that falls along these recommendations from these various authoritative sources who have done the research and you have actually designed this matrix to incorporate those elements?
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't want to. A lot of the work has already been done, so there's no reason to go ahead and recreate the wheel, right? And I'm using information that's already out there, that it's in different silos, right? It's in different places. And since my focus, I was very focused on identifying controls to detect and mitigate ransomware attack, right? Then I was able to take from all these different frameworks, get ideas from them, and then go ahead and identify those set of controls. And that took about, I would say, 6 to 7 months of research to do that and create this list, right? And the list is about 82 controls and so forth. Yeah, there's the rcxmatrix.org there on the chat. And so that's what we did. And now how can CISOs use it? Um, I don't know if I can share screen. I know I think I said I.
You should be able to.
Okay, good. So let me know if you see it. And I have a big screen,
Yeah,
so I
that's
don't
great.
know. Yeah, so you can see it nice and
Great.
clear. Okay,
Let, let me
beautiful,
pull this in. All right,
beautiful.
great. So you can go ahead. Great.
Okay, good. So this is the control matrix, rcxmatrix.org, and it gives you the 3 um, what I call categories, right? What I did is there's a total of about 82, 84 controls, but I segmented them into what we're calling foundational, advanced, and elite, right? Foundational control is those are the basic controls. This is what I consider, and based on industry research, is what we consider that every single company should have these basic controls. And we're talking, right, web application firewall, vulnerability scanning, email authentication protocols. We're not talking anything out of the norm, right? Network segmentation in the DMZ, security awareness, and so forth. right? These are a set of basic controls. We then move into advanced. Advanced controls is about 28 to 30 that are controls that build on the basic or foundational controls, right? And then we finish this list with what we're calling elite controls. Now, elite controls, it's not actually something that you buy. For example, we see zero trust architecture here, right? It's not something that you buy a box for. You don't buy a zero trust uh, appliance. Zero trust is the culmination of a or the implementation of a mature cybersecurity program. And what does it mean when we say mature cybersecurity program? If you have about in my from my way of seeing cybersecurity, if you have 90% of the controls in foundational deployed, okay, so let's say right you have 90% of them deployed, and then you have, let's say, about 60 to 75% of advanced controls deployed, most probably you're on your way to having zero trust. So this is what I mean. Zero trust is a combination of network segmentation, vulnerability scanning, right? Web filtering, a good patch system, patch and software patch system, a really good security awareness program, right? You need to have 2FA, right? So you anti-phishing, you have all these things as part of foundational. Then you go into advanced, into the advanced systems, and now we see that you need multi-factor authentication, you need an EDR, you need IDS, IPS, you need network segmentation. Okay, implement network segmentation. You need MFA, identity access management, privileged access management, DLP. If you have all of those controls implemented, all those controls that I just mentioned, if you have them implemented, you're on your way to having a good zero trust program in place. You see what I'm saying? Does it make sense?
Definitely.
Okay.
I think one of the questions also that comes up from time to time is that it's all about risk management.
Okay.
And whatever is done within an organization must be done in regards to meeting or helping the organization to meet its objectives, whether business or organizational objectives. So at no point in time should there be controls that are being implemented that prevents or slows down the operation of the organization or the business. So is it that we randomly apply these controls, or is it done within the framework of the risks that the organization faces?
Good. That's a good question. So risk, it's dependent on the organization itself, right? What's risky to
Yes.
me may not be risky to you, or vice versa. So I know, for example, if I'm a CISO, right, when I do assessments on my controls, when I do a NIST CSF that includes the CMMI for maturity, right, I would like my controls
Yes.
to be at least at a level 3 and higher, right? But that's me, okay? And so I want my controls to be 3.0 and higher on a maturity scale. Richard, you might be more of you're in an environment, you're in a fintech where you take more risks, right? Because in a fintech environment, you need to go out to market very quickly with solutions, right? So you do take risks in that environment. In that case, right? You as a CISO of a fintech, it could be that you're very happy if your critical controls that you had identified as critical controls have a 2.3 CMMI and higher, right? So it's a different risk way of looking at risk. And no one is wrong. This is the funny thing. No one is wrong when we're talking about risk. So risk is like a personal thing. Whatever you're comfortable with, that is your risk, right? So in this case, as I said before, right, we have the foundational, okay, and we're going to go through this, and I will answer your question. So when you come in here to use this, the way that you use it as a CISO is this controls deployed. This is an interesting question. There is a question that you have to ask, and if you go into the how to use it, it will give you what that question is, right? So when you're looking at this and you look at the controls, web application firewalls, right? The question that you should be asking is, have I deployed this control? If I have deployed this control, how good do I feel about the deployment? That is, do I know that I have all of the information that I need about how I've deployed this web application firewall? Do I know exactly where I've deployed it? Do I know exactly where or how it is configured? Do I know exactly how I can get information right now about the web application firewalls? Can I have access to the configuration, the latest, the current code, and so forth, right? If your answer is yes to that, if you feel really good, you have really good information about it, then your answer is going to be yes. Okay. If you go to the next one, security logging and monitoring controls. Have I deployed it? Yes. Do I feel good about it? I mean, do I know it's everywhere? Do I know that it's collecting all the information that I need? If you're truthful to yourself, you're probably going to say, I don't know. I need more information. So you select question mark. And notice what happens. This where becomes the cool thing about this matrix. It automatically maps all of those boxes. So blue boxes here, blue boxes, is what we call the detection controls. Remember that the matrix is to identify and mitigate ransomware attacks as early as possible. So the blue boxes is what we've identified as detection mechanisms, and the red boxes are your mitigation mechanisms. Okay. And again, what we've done is we mapped. So if a control, we already mapped what control it mitigates against. So over here on the columns, we have the well-known techniques. These are the 7 techniques that every cyber attack uses to begin an attack, right? This is what the cyber delinquents or cyber criminals will use to start an attack. Okay. Drive-by compromise, external public-facing applications. ERS is external remote systems. Phishing, supply chain compromise, trusted relationship, and valid account. And so this controls, in this case, web application firewall. If you have a web application firewall, then you have a control that will help you mitigate against attacks that start with drive-by compromise, external public applications, and external remote systems. If you have security logging and monitoring controls, you have a control that helps you with every single one of those techniques. If you have vulnerability scanning, it will help you mitigate attacks, drive-by compromise, external public, external remote systems, and phishing. Make sense? So you start to
Uh,
see then, you start to
just a
see then, sure,
just a quick input.
sure.
So, in light of all of these controls, a very important thing that comes to mind is the fact that even though you have the web application firewall, you have the security logging and monitoring, your SIEM system, your vulnerability scanning, applying the best practices or the good practices for those controls is very important in light
Mhm.
of the way the business operates. So it's not just a matter of saying a checkbox item that we have
Exactly.
acquire one. So that's very important as well. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. This is not to be used as and that's a very good comment because I've seen it on already asked on LinkedIn. It's like, yay, another checkbox. No, this is not a checkbox, right? So notice this one. Once we finish, I made it smaller, and I'm just finishing it. Notice how quickly, right? You answer, and it automatically fills it in for you, right? And what happens at the end is like I'm gonna make this smaller so we can see the whole screen. Okay. So what happens at the end? If the CISOs, if you're a CISO, you take a look at this control, uh, foundational, 26 questions. It should take you no more than 1 minute per question. And again, we already know the question, right? Vulnerability scanning. Do I have it deployed? Yes. Do I feel good about that deployment? Do I know? The answer is no, I need more information. So a question mark, right? You question, do you monitor social media and other platforms? No. Okay, then put a no. Again, this is not to rate you as a CISO, right? This is a very quick way for you to look graphically where you are. So when you finish doing this, right, you're going to take a look at this, and now you're interested in finding out uh, where are my question marks, right? My question marks is what you're going to put a little asterisk next to it because this is what you need to focus on. You need to make sure you turn those question marks into a yes, because that means that you do have that control deployed, but you really don't know how it's working, right? So that means immediately your CMMI, your maturity for that control is not as high as you thought it was because you don't have that information. But again, if you go through this, it takes you less than 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, if you're truthful to yourself, you will have this representation really, really cool. How else are people using it? For example, we have network segmentation here, right? Network segmentation is a control that helps you with 5 of the 7 techniques. So it's a pretty interesting control, right? Or let's use 2FA better. 2FA is a control that helps you with every to mitigate attacks with every for every single technique. So it becomes a very important control. So that's your one of the answers to your question about risk and criticality. This is the way that I would use it, right? If the control helps with the majority of the techniques, then I want to focus on that control because one control covers everything. So what do you do then? You can print this page and you show this to your CEO, your CIO, your board of directors, and they can quickly see, right? You tell them, look, if I have a no, I don't have that control, and so I need you to work with me because we need to implement that control. I need the budget for that control. You see how you start to use this as a strategic tool as well to help you with your program. Also, if you use third party companies to provide assessment services for you, every time that you see a little question mark, you can then contract those consultants for that specific assessment. So instead of telling them, come and give me a NIST CSF for all of my controls, right? Come in and give me a very specific assessment on my network security controls, my firewalls, VPNs, proxy services, because I need to turn these question marks into a yes, right? So it's a much focused solution, much faster for either your team or your external consultants to provide the information to you, right? And you can then take this information and create, as I said before, your strategy. What are you going to do next? Where are you going to focus next? How are you going to present the budget to your C levels for them to give you the budget that you need. With this matrix, you can provide that pretty well, right? So another way to look at it from a risk perspective, Richie, going back to your question, if you look at this for DBC, drive-by compromise, for example, there, even though we have 28 controls in foundational, of the 28 controls, 17, only 17 of those controls are good to deal with drive-by compromise. Okay, so if you look at this, if you count how many controls in that first column is a yes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 controls, and we have a total of 17, correct? So that means that you have about 50%, 8 divided by 17, you have 47% of the controls that are needed to mitigate drive-by compromise. You have 47% of the controls installed. That means that you have 53% that is at a risk level, right? You have 50% risk that you will be a victim of a ransomware attack that starts with a drive-by compromise.
That's very important. Having the numbers in
Exactly.
relation to the
Exactly.
organization overall financials
Exactly. So,
is very
so Richie,
important.
so Richie, this is amazing, isn't it? And I
Awesome.
mean, in 30 minutes, you can do this. And all you have to do again is just count, right? 27 controls and just count in here, you know, the 17 control totals, right? Count the number of boxes, 17, and then divide, the number that is a yes, divide by that total of controls that you needed. There's your risk. Are you happy with 57% risk? I know I'm not. So I want to do a lot of work on getting those question marks turned into a yes. Why the question marks? Because a no, it means I know I don't have these controls installed. But maybe it's easier to turn the question marks to a yes than to actually go through the whole process of implementing a new control. Make sense?
It definitely does. And the great thing about this is that, as you have mentioned before, you are not reinventing the wheel. These are things that we see from
Exactly.
day to day among various frameworks. There's a ton of resources that speaks to all of these controls, how it is that we apply these controls, best practices for configurations. So I think one of the challenges is that many times organizations might be aware of what needs to be done, but getting it done or having the requisite skill set or financial resources to get the necessary tools is where I think a lot of times the challenges
The
actually lie.
communication. The
Yeah,
communication. How do we communicate the urgency to the higher ups? And some of the CISOs that I spoke with when I presented this, they're like, "Wow, this is cool. That matrix, the way that it shows, right? Because anybody can read, and you can just tell them that, like, look, everywhere we have an end, we don't have that control, so we we could be a victim to this type of attack, right? It's an easier way. And to tell you the truth, when we developed this, we didn't think of this tool to be used as a strategic tool for a CISO. So if, for the community that's watching, and thanks everyone that's here, acting on the chat, active on the chat. If you go and you use this, right? We're looking for use cases. If you can send me a message for the use cases, really appreciate it. This tool came out, I would say, 4 weeks ago. Richie, that was about 3 weeks ago that you saw it, right? When we contacted
yes,
the first
it's
time.
about 3 weeks ago, and like
Exactly.
everyone was blown away, like where is this coming from?
Exactly. And thanks to you and others, in the last 3 weeks we have 45,000 visits.
Wow.
45,000 visits. Yeah. So it tells you, right? It tells you the interest in ransomware, which goes hand in hand with the reports about 57% of companies being ransomware. I'm from Colombia, right in South America, and this weekend on Friday, because all the ransomware attacks usually happen on Fridays, right? A big company, Colombian company, got ransomware, and it was the same thing, right? They sent out the report because they have a nice incident response, right? Uh, but that's about it. I mean, we don't know how they're doing internally. How is the CISO? How is the cybersecurity team dealing with the ransomware? Um, and the goal for this ransomware control matrix is to help everyone out there to quickly detect and mitigate those attacks as quickly as possible. And somebody in a event that I participated, they say something really interesting. They said we need to stop looking at controls, as cybersecurity controls, as isolated systems. We need to start looking at the controls as a network of systems, right? And the ransomware control matrix, that's exactly that. It shows you the controls on each family, but it shows you also that if you do the majority of those controls on the foundational level, you will automatically, almost automatically, go and start doing the more advanced controls. You shouldn't do advanced controls if you don't have your foundational controls in place, right? You shouldn't go and do, let's say, IAM if you don't have MFA or you don't have at least 2FA implemented. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So it also helps the CISOs deal with marketing and those aggressive sales that they want to sell you the latest technology in blockchain technology. Look and see how well you're set up. Look how well you're with the foundational, how well you're with the advanced. If
The,
go ahead.
okay, I was just saying that when we do the research, and for many of these breaches or ransomware attacks that actually take place, it goes back to those basic fundamental
Hmm.
principles. And many times these are the things that are missing: basic patching, updating,
Yes.
I mean, segmentation, access controls, some of those basic elements. I mean, managing administrative access on end user devices to prevent pivoting, for example, within a network to prevent encryption. Things like these, some of those are the fundamental principles that are missing. And so often, security is complicated when
Yes.
we throw all of these resources, these great tools. I mean, there are fantastic tools out there. But when we actually throw a bunch of tools within our environment without really understanding or
Yeah.
without covering the basics, then that is where we have a lot of loopholes for problems. Yes, go
You know
ahead.
why? You know why? Because fundamental is not sexy, right? We all as CISOs, we all want to be, we all think about the 0 days, right? That's all we focus on. How do we defend against the 0 days? And when we look back at the ransomware attacks, you know, very almost, you will say like 99.9% of the ransomware attacks never use a 0 day. They don't need to because, as you said, right, the basics, they just go with the basics. Okay, and when I hear somebody come in and say, we have the latest solution with AI and everything, I'm like, oh my god, why are we talking about AI if you haven't done your basics? When we hear about companies saying you need to set up your virtual SOC with threat hunting capabilities, you're like, really? So the second control is security, in foundational security, logging and monitoring, right? That's the second control in foundational. Do you have a yes in there? right? Are you monitoring everywhere? Do you have all that information? Can I ask you, say, show me the log for this workstation in the past hour? Can you give me that information as soon as I ask it to you? At least within 5 minutes. If you can't give me that, why are you moving into, advanced threat intelligence with, with all of this, uh, threat hunting teams? You're not ready. Yes, it's sexy, but no, man, you got to get back to the fundamentals. Fundamentals is sexy as well. And in fact, I'm thinking of printing a shirt, a little shirt with that. Fundamentals are sexy.
That's very interesting. Oh, so that's I mean, looking at all of this is something that for sure we in the community appreciate. I mean, for us to really dive into all of these elements to
Mm.
see how best that we can actually strengthen the security maturity within the organizations. And it's all about the capabilities and the team versus really, as I said before, communication, working together, because it's not that we are not able to deal with the attacks and the issues,
Mhm.
but is the capabilities and the focus and the drive. Unlike the bad guys, this is what they do. They don't give up. They are persistent, and they will continue to try to find that one vulnerability to exploit. So we have to use all the resources that we have to ensure that our environments are as safe as possible. And as you have mentioned, prevention is always better than cure.
Oh,
Prevention.
absolutely, absolutely,
Prevention.
absolutely. I think that's the game. And notice that nowhere in there am I saying, or are we saying, that this is going to stop, stop you from being victim to ransomware, because you can't. But
Exactly. I mean, yeah,
detection and prevention, right? And mitigation. You got to focus on those. And once you have a good base in the detection and mitigation, then you can start thinking about, all right, so now I know how to detect. Now I need to somehow automate that detection process so that the mitigation control gets into place, and I can control, right? I can control the spread of the ransomware. But you need the foundations. You need to understand what are your detection controls, how they're working, how your mitigation controls, how they're working, and then start thinking about automation. And that's when you start talking about implementing SOAR and other type of solutions, which, if you notice, if you go into the advanced, that's when you start seeing all those controls, right? Um, and but you can't jump into the deep end and assume that it's going to be working. As you said, you're going to find a lot of gaps. You're going to install the solution. You're going to install if you want to do SOAR, for example, you are going to have it installed, and you're going to check the box. Oh yeah, it has SOAR, but how good is it? I mean, are you probably using it just for two controls? And again, we found out in this matrix, we've identified 26 controls in foundational, right? And with your source solution that you implemented, you're implementing two, maybe four of those 26 controls. So why did you spend a lot of time and effort on an advanced solution when you still have, you know, 20 something plus controls to focus on before you think about implementing that type of solution? Makes sense? That's the goal that we're trying to do here with this matrix.
exactly. Um, and just before we go, I mean, what's your final words on, I mean, your outlook on ransomware in terms of where do you see this going, and the future of businesses in light of it?
So 45,000 visits in 3 weeks. It should tell us, right? People people are hungry, right? It's not like cybersecurity or CISOs are just staying, not doing anything, right? It's just that for some reason we don't have. that information in the industry. And so we'll see. I mean, we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, CISOs start to use this, start to implement and use this matrix. Um, we're going to try to automate this solution in the future, um, create some dashboards and so forth, but we'll see where we get there. Uh, but the request to all the CISOs listening, use the matrix, use it the way that it fits your view of cybersecurity. And if you want to share your finding, if you want to share how you're using it, send me a comment. It's you have a comment contact section there in the rcxmatrix.org. Send me a comment there. Let me know how you're using the matrix. We really love to hear how people are using it, because some may be using it in a different way, innovative way, and I'm like, wow, that's a pretty cool idea. So uh, just keep fighting the fight. I don't think it's going to get any better for a while, tell you the truth, unfortunately. But some of us can do something to, get us ready to continue fighting with this.
Exactly, and that's the reality.
Yeah.
Just being resilient as best as possible to use the tools that we have at our disposal as effectively and efficiently as possible. And this tool definitely has a lot of potential, and for sure you'll be getting a lot of reviews. I mean, in terms of things that you can have also had to make this thing far more powerful than what it is right now. So, Ed, it was indeed a great pleasure. I mean, having this
Thank you.
conversation. I look forward to many more conversations like
I'm
this
here.
in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the invitation. And everyone, thank you so much. And thank you for the comments and the interaction. Thanks.
Awesome, guys. So until then, stay tuned for more conversations like these on CyberJA.